Regime change is a very complicated process. It relies on the ability to coordinate between many disparate parties in government, in opposition, in the media, in activists on the ground and abroad, in order to promote a narrative that presents events on the ground in a certain way and which can take control of those events and ultimately lead to the downfall of the target government. Welcome back to the Sampan Viking channel. This is the second part of a discussion about the information war in China and what it's looking to achieve. In the first part, we did indeed look at the difference in governance between the West and China, and now we are going to take a look and discuss the actual methodology of subversion and regime change as used against China and all its various disparate parts. The opening statement, I think, is the nub of this. The campaigns we are seeing against China today were put in place and the first stages implemented a very, very long time ago. And these were put into motion in the anticipation of China responding in various ways, and China developing in certain ways. And so the narrative that they were building up to, the priming that they were getting for all the other associated parties, was supposed to anticipate the fall of events. And so that would put a very definite spin on actual images, actual things happening that would seriously weaken the regime at home, as well as bolster hostility to it abroad, and so ultimately bring down the CPC. Well, things clearly have not gone that way. And at the heart of this, I think we had the argument that you can't have um, a, a hardline communist government ruling over a capitalist system. They were incompatible, and that eventually the public clamour for liberal democracy would become undeniable, and the party would fall, and a new regime, no doubt supported and backed by its friends in the West, would take control under China. That was more amiable and to Western concerns and needs would be put in place. So in other words, a puppet state that would purely serve Western interests. This has not happened. Anybody that believes that there's going to be a regime change in China now, well, please contact me because I really do have a bridge I would like to sell you. Once upon a time, the media could say whatever they liked about countries that were far away and unfamiliar and with people that spoke very different languages, because there was absolutely no way anybody could to contradict that narrative. Today, that is completely different. Everybody and their mother has a camera on a digital device and is connected to the internet. Everywhere on earth is being recorded and uploaded. And not only that, in China, do you have lots of millions of Chinese people going out and uploading, principally onto Chinese platforms. You also have hundreds of Westerners of all descriptions also living in China. They do the same thing for the areas where they live, and quite often they travel to areas that which are contentious in the news, and they produce video footage of what life is like there. And this creates a very, very clear disconnect between the official narrative of the Western powers and their media and what is clearly visible on the ground within China itself. This is the big problem the West has got in trying to maintain pressure with China. And before I go any further, I think I'll just quickly visit the key areas where subversive activity has been undertaken in the past, and show exactly how it has failed to get traction in any source. First place to go to, obviously, is Tibet. This has been a bone of contention since the 50s. This is all down to the fact, and this is the unique to Tibet, that it does have a highly visible figurehead who was a highly recognizable and leader figure within the region itself. And this is unique in all of the hotspots in China. None of the others do. So Tibet had the Dalai Lama. He was very much a creature of the Republic of China government. He never settled under the Communist Party of China. And so when reforms came along, he rebelled and fled to India, where he and his government of exile have been ever since. Now they have tried to sell the genocide narrative in Tibet as well, but again, that's proven to be completely different from the truth. And the cultural genocide argument, it's all been tried, and this was by a opposition which had a highly recognizable figurehead and going against a China that was going through massive turmoil and massive changes, both from the early years of the revolution, Great Leap Forward, Cultural Revolution, and then to those volatile and delicate transitional phases during the 80s into the 90s. Yet even here, subversion was not able to make any real headway. Um, Most of the consumption there, I mean, they've long since given up on any attempt to break the province away, the administration authority away. It just isn't going to happen, and everything now is just being done for Western consumption. It's it is a front that has finished its value. To be honest, the last uprising, the last riots there were in 2004. A relatively small number of people got involved. There was no general uprising, just a few zealots went out and attacked ordinary Han Chinese, which upset a lot of people anyway. And it fizzled out very, very quickly and achieved absolutely nothing. In the last 15 years, Tibet, like other areas of China, have become more integrated. The people have become far more prosperous, far better off, and far more secular. So there is no great desire to rebel against something that's doing them an awful lot of good, and especially whilst those that do have religious, moderate or devout, their beliefs are not being unnecessarily interfered with. China has found its own Panchen Lama. I know that Free Tibet has its own, but most people don't care as long as there is a Panchen Lama. And this is the thing: is that their only power, the Free Tibet, is that they have the current Dalai Lama. He's now a very old man. Within a few years, I have no doubt he will be dead. And when he dies, he will no longer be the Dalai Lama. And in which case, the relevance um, and the appeal of the Free Tibet government in exile will be zero. It will have no relevance whatsoever. China has its own Panchen Lama. They will find and anoint a new Dalai Lama. It'll all be done in accordance with ancient Chinese tradition, in accordance to Tibet. Everybody in Tibet will be happy because the offices are filled with somebody able to fulfill those offices, and Tibet will become a very peaceful, very settled part of China, which indeed it is now, but with absolutely no opportunity for any subversive activity. I have no doubt that when the Dalai Lama does die, his followers in India will have a last hurrah. But again, this won't have any traction inside Tibet itself. This will be purely done for external consumption. The next area, of course, is Xinjiang, and that probably is a rather more serious area because this is bound up with the war on terror. You have you have a lot of young men were radicalized back in the early part of this millennium. Most of them found their way eventually into there was a lot of terrorism, I should say, which did spark a police crackdown and de-radicalization methods. A lot of the real zealots, the real militants, managed to get out of the country and made their way to Syria, where they became better militants, trained better. A lot were killed, a lot are still alive. They're holed up mainly in Idlib province in Syria or under the former ISIS areas now under Kurdish control in the east of the Syrian countryside. There is always a chance that these people will be returned to Xinjiang in order to lead an uprising there. But again, I think there's not very much fertile ground for them to come back to. When these plans were first laid, they all anticipated a horrendous military crackdown in Xinjiang. In other words, that the narrative we're now getting was anticipated to be correct. Millions in concentration camps, a dystopian landscape, hellscape, cities leveled, mosques smashed, But that isn't what happened. They poured money in, they poured in education. Yes, people that showed militant sympathies were taken away for both political education and also skills education, so that they came out with practical skills and a way to make a living. And it's true is that for the vast majority of people, those who have the ability to make a decent living for themselves and an aspirational lifestyle are not going to give much truck with militancy and terrorism, which has a very short shelf life. So even if several tens thousands of Uyghur militants are returned to Xinjiang, there isn't going to be very fertile ground for them to mix upon. There'll be insurgency, maybe there'll be terrorism. It won't have popular support. It'll be pretty easy for the Chinese authorities to root out, and it will do damage, it will kill people, it will alienate the population, and ultimately come to nothing. But this is a great example of what happens when a narrative is set and it can then no longer fits the facts on the ground. You end up listening to total rubbish, especially as so many people with cameras and social media accounts have gone there and video everyday life for a vast number of people. You don't see concentration camps, you don't see empty cities, you don't see barbed wire checkpoints and watchtowers. It's just not there. What you have, whilst it might be misrepresented, some things may security measures are going to be misrepresented in the West, but you have things that are actually familiar to most Chinese people as being normal in China, with a slightly stronger security presence because there is still a security risk if they take the eye off the ball. This really then leaves Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a Han Chinese city that was taken by force in the mid 19th century for the benefit of British state sanctioned narcotics dealers. They had it on a license for 100 years, that extended that to 150 years pretty much. And in 1997, Hong Kong was, returned to China. Is doing us a favour. The British realised they could no longer hang on to Hong Kong. They didn't have the power to do so. China wanted it back. They didn't have any legal framework for trying to retain it. They had to acquiesce and give the colony back. This was undoubtedly used as was planned to be a strike point for a flame that would originally have spread into the heart of Han China, the Pearl Delta area, spreading to the Yangtze River Valley, spreading up to the Yellow Valley in Beijing, and ultimately, with a view of creating mass unrest and toppling the Communist Party. Well, it didn't happen, and when the Hong Kong protests did start, they had such an anti-mainland element to them. All they did was alienate every single mainlander in China, and these were given very prominent coverage, by the way, especially the mainland elements to it as well. So, from what was supposed to be a spark to to light a fire at the top of the Chinese government, sort of morphed into a half-hearted attempt at a separatist movement. It never got anywhere because once again the response from the authorities was not what had been anticipated when the plans were made, and they were made a long time ago. This was a generation that was primed since infancy to take their role as young adults as radicals fighting for freedom and democracy, and most of them seem to be bound up somehow with evangelical Christian churches of one sort, the Moonies and other similar organizations from America, Korea, and Taiwan. Um, what you didn't see were tanks on the streets. The PLA did not go in. You didn't see kids going under the tanks, in the tracks of tanks. There were no machine gunnings in the street. You had a lot of kids smashing things up and attacking people, getting a really quite restrained response from the Hong Kong police. Nobody was actually killed by the police, although some bystanders were killed by protesters. And in the end, all that China had to do was pass a national security law with uh, with provisions very similar to those of the national security laws of both America, the UK, other European countries, and it killed it dead. And again, everything that's now coming out from Hong Kong is really intended for Western consumption because nobody really takes it very seriously in Hong Kong itself. Um, we're now being told that hundreds of thousands, up to a million Chinese from Hong Kong will leave the colony and come to Britain. And in fact, so far only a few hundred have actually left. It is worth mentioning I travelled between Hong Kong and London, uh, on a not too infrequent basis. There's plenty of flights direct on multiple airlines between Hong Kong and London, and they are always full. So, be aware of seeing pictures of people arriving from Hong Kong. They always have done. They have done since the 70s, and they will continue to do so. Some of them might travel on the B&O license, B&O passport, if they think there's any use to it, use to them in it, but most of them will just continue to do so in the same way. These are not refugees, these are people that have been living and working in the UK with connections in Hong Kong as well for many, many years, decades. So be aware of that. Hong Kong, again, is not going to happen. And I think this really is what has happened in China in general with the Western narrative. It is now a narrative purely designed for Western consumers. They know that there is no chance of turning the actual Chinese population. Now all they need to do is turn off the Western population so that they won't even listen to stories about China and only do, in an Orwellian hate style, assume it's bad and not give it any notion. And this, again, is down to the governance, quality of governance. And in time, I'm sure that with the people posting videos on social media in the quality of governance response from China in the ongoing future, even this narrative will get pushed and pushed and pushed. And it is, because we're seeing the increasing here in ridiculousness, the cheap tricks that Western media have been resorting to. We saw today, the other week, colouring trees grey to make the place look unpleasant, diminishing sunlight to make it look sickly, putting colour filters on videos to make the sky look yellow and diseased. If you have to resort, if the home of the free, freedom and justice and democracy has to resort to this sort of thing, it doesn't really do their message much, the credibility of their message much good at all. So I think that is it really on my discussion of what the West is looking to achieve in China. What started off as regime change has now become saving themselves as much as anything, making sure there's no regime change in the West, because they ain't going to get one in China. Thank you very much for joining me for part 2 of this discussion. I hope you found it informative and enjoyable. If you did, please like, please subscribe, please ring the bell, please leave a comment. The next discussion I'm undertaking will be on a more military matter. I'll be looking at war against China and specifically what this means and what this means in the context of the ever deepening strategic partnership with Russia. I hope you can join me for this one, and I look forward to seeing you all again on this channel very, very soon. Thank you very much.